Okay.
I'm pleased to introduce our speakers for this evening, Candace Curry, Director and Clerk, and Ava Mosley, Director of Green Burial, Massachusetts. Green Burial, Massachusetts is a statewide all-volunteer 501c3 nonprofit whose guiding principle is to restore death to its rightful place in the cycle of life. Candace Curry, Director and Clerk, has witnessed both conventional and natural or green burial during her 20 years at a rural historic cemetery, Mount Auburn in Cambridge and Watertown, Mass. The grief advantage of natural burial is underscored when family and friends actively participate in the ritual of burial. The more participation, the sooner the healing. The laws of nature and the environmental benefits of green burial is what led Candace to advocate for it. Ava Mosley, Director of Green Burial, Massachusetts, is one of the founding directors, and she is also the membership secretary of the Funeral Consumers Alliance of Eastern Massachusetts, which, along with the Funeral Consumers Alliance of Western Massachusetts, launched Green Burial, Massachusetts. Before retiring, she was curator of manuscripts at Radcliffe's Women's History Library. In 2019, Ava was nominated for the Green Burial Council Leadership Award, which is presented to an individual, organization, or business that has demonstrated foresight, innovation, and extraordinary commitment to the environment through sustainability and attainability in the area of human death care practices. Please join me in welcoming Candace and Ava to our meeting.
Thank you, David. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. Perfect. Eva and I are really happy to be here tonight, and I will be the primary speaker. Eva will tell a few stories, and we also have a YouTube video to share that's about 5 minutes. And I will continue with slides, and then we'll have time for questions. So we're looking at maybe a 20 to 25 minute total presentation, and then time for questions. And I'd like to start off to find out what questions right off the bat do any of you have, or why did you want to hear about green burial? Just anybody can either shout something out or put it into chat. I'm seeing a quiet crowd. Okay, so let us begin. And I'm sure you'll have questions after the presentation.
And if you all don't mind muting yourselves so that and then unmuting when you're ready to talk, please.
From Paul, we are running out of land. How does cost compare with traditional burial? Okay, the land question I wasn't going to answer, but that's a really excellent question. Costs, we have a slide about some costs, so perfect. So I'm going to start with sharing my screen.
So this is Eva, I'm the warm-up. Long before the green burial movement began, I had 3 different experiences that persuaded me that green burial, even though it didn't exist yet, is the best way to deal with the dead human body. First, when my mother died 51 years ago, my brother and I had no idea what to do, as she had never let us even go to a funeral. A Jewish undertaker showed us several big, expensive coffins, but I spied, tucked away in a dark corner, a plain pine box. "I want that," said. He said it was only for the Orthodox and sold us something much more expensive. We were secular Jews, but while the Orthodox have to have such a fine coffin, surely others could have one too. I never forgot that simple biodegradable box, nor that not quite honest underdecker. My second experience was learning about Hindu and Buddhist views of the world as cyclical. For instance, animals needing oxygen and exhaling carbon dioxide, plants needing carbon dioxide and giving off oxygen. But we are still using fossil fuels and other non-renewable resources and striving for continuous growth, which is unsustainable on a finite planet. With green burial, our bodies become part of the cycle of life and death. Third, we lived in Vermont for a while, and I had a Cub Scout then. And 1 month, I had the boys create a compost pile using plant waste I collected and fresh cow manure we got from a friend's barn. 2 days later, I stuck a metal rod into the pile, and in moments, it was too hot to touch. Plant and animal waste was turning into soil that could feed more plants, which in turn could feed other animals or us. Our bodies very naturally can do that too.
Thank
So,
you,
yeah.
Eva. Yes, so Eva has long been ecological and environmental, and she's definitely helped Greenbelt, Massachusetts lead the charge across the state. I would also now like to go to the YouTube video that I want to share. And in order for me to do that, I need to stop my share, reshare, and then play the YouTube video. This is 5 minutes. It's of this woman, Amy Cunningham, who's a funeral director in New York City. And I think it gives a wonderful description of what she does, what Green Burial is, and how it's helping the world. So let me do a new share for you. And are you now seeing a YouTube video?
Yes.
Awesome.
We have all kinds of cords connecting our energetic system with that of the deceased. There is no death in nature. The natural process of building up and dissolving down is part of all life. Funerals should be real and connect us with the earth. I'm a licensed funeral director working to help families all over New York City with green burial, cremation, and home funerals where the deceased is laid out in the parlor in the old-fashioned way. I was born into a grieving household, so I think I've had a connection to loss for all my life. I grew up around a family that was grieving the loss of an infant son who had died at the age of 13 months before I was on the scene. There was also 2 uncles who had died in World War II, whose pictures were on the wall, who I think my dad was very much missing. So there was a lot of people who were very present in the house even though they were absent. I was 54 years old when my elderly father became ill and died in South Carolina. I was amazed at how well my dad directed his own death. So out of that experience, I came back to Brooklyn and said, I wonder what it would be like to be in that line of work. In the early days of pioneers, if someone had their own land, they had their own family cemetery. The community took care of their own. There was no organized industry. During the Civil War, there were so many men dead in the battlefield that initially they buried them in trench graves. It was decided to preserve them for transit to their homes for burial. Embalming became the bedrock of the American funeral industry. I'm trying to make death a communal experience again and not just a medical event. The funeral industry has not been running clean, and nobody has been paying attention to our habits until recently. A green burial is a way to care for the dead in a way that furthers legitimate environmental aims. There's no embalming of the body, no chemicals used to preserve a biodegradable casket, which can be of pine or wicker. All of these caskets dissolve in the soil and allow the body to very naturally go back from whence we came. It's the same burial that we did in this country 200 years ago. The soft tissue on our bones has usefulness even after death. These are molecules that can return to the soil and foster plant life. This soft tissue should really be seen as something of value rather than just something to combust. The need to address the issues of global warming and climate change have inspired a lot of people who were already in the green burial movement. They've become more outspoken. We need to look at all of these environmental issues, find ways to honor our dead and then dispose of them. We're very bad in our society at saying goodbye. When you look around your friends and relatives, you'll see the theme of grief weaving through. My hopes are that we learn to see death as inevitable and very natural and even beautiful. Grief will be with you for the rest of your life. So being present to that grief becomes a tool and a way of being. This is consistent with Buddhist belief that in death contemplation, you become more present to what is. I think we need to carry our grief and share it with others.
What I love about that little video is she talks about family cemeteries at the beginning, and having Googled a little bit about Sharon, you have 7 or 8 family cemeteries in your town. And she mentions the Civil War and shows some images of the Civil War. Oh, sorry, I don't think you guys can hear that. Is that true?
We can hear it.
We'll stop that right now. Okay, sorry about that. The Civil War she mentioned, and we had those striking images, and she referred to embalming during the Civil War became the bedrock of the American funeral industry. Back then in the 1860s, they actually did embalming with arsenic. Today, they're using a formaldehyde-based solution, neither of which should be going into the ground or our bodies for that matter. She also mentioned a communal event rather than a medical event. That's what brought her into the new funeral industry. And the soft tissue of our bodies, we are actually part of nature. We have seemed to have forgotten that we provide nutrients that can go back into the earth. That's one of the key tenets of green burial. And just the striking images of global warming and climate change, the pollutants and the carbon footprint that we're taking up. And I know Sustainable Sharon is well aware of those things. So I'd like to now continue on with a few more slides. This slide of a shrouded body is from Prairie Creek Conservation Cemetery. That is in North Florida. And they have the beauty of having over 50 volunteers who, as soon as there's a call out that, hey, we need a grave dug, they actually have volunteers who are digging the graves. And they have sandy soil that has just the right amount of natural organic matter to keep the sides of the grave up after it's been dug. And it's safe enough for people to stand along the edges so that they can actually lower this shrouded body into the ground. So this is the ultimate green of a green cemetery. It's restoring habitat as well as keeping open space without anything toxic. Most conventional cemeteries would have something lined up like these concrete boxes. These go into the ground often when a cemetery is going to create a new section or they want to open up a new row. These things will sort of help keep up the sides of a grave. They will also help prevent a cave-in after the burial and when heavy equipment drives over the graves to perhaps dig another grave. But their primary function really is to maintain a flat lawn and not really have to go back and put more topsoil on top of the lawn after the burial has occurred. And here's an example of a conventional cemetery where we're looking at a burial density of about 1,000 to 1,200 burials per acre versus this green or natural image where we have anywhere from 300 to 600 burials per acre, depending on the type of green cemetery that it is. What I also like to point out from this slide is the pile of soil at the back of the cemetery. This soil has been displaced by the grave boxes and the caskets that went into the ground. In a natural burial ground, it's mounded up. No soil is going somewhere else. It's all going back on top of the grave. Eventually, 6 months, 18 months, this will level down to about the same height as the soil and earth around it. Lowering of a grave. So Prairie Creek Conservation Cemetery, we saw people lowering a casket into a grave, or excuse me, a shroud. In the little video with Amy, we also saw people lowering a casket and decorating a casket. So these can be part of a green burial, but I happen to know that in Rockbridge Cemetery in Sharon, that does allow green burial, they are also asking people to use what they call the lowering device. And these things they also refer to as the greens. So in cemetery parlance, these fake things that look like grass are called the greens, and they go around the metal things that somebody would stand on. Notice over here in the picture on the left, people are standing on a board and they're using ropes. This lowering device has canvas straps and it has a button, a little switch that when you flip it, it will slowly lower what's in the casket all the way down to the bottom of the grave. And usually it's the cemetery staff that does that process. And I don't want to talk too much about ritual. However, even if you're not directly involved with lowering the casket, this might be the moment, because this might take a minute or 2 minutes to get into the grave, this casket. It might be the moment for a reading or maybe some prayer or singing, recognizing that in fact the body is going into the grave. I know I recently went to a gravesite of the woman who was like my second mother, and the people in the cemetery asked us to leave before they even lowered the body into the grave. Well, I insisted on staying, and when I got to the reception afterwards, my friend said, "Oh my God, I'm so glad you stayed. I wanted to make sure it was my mother going in." So it's important to stick around and watch these things happen. And conventional burial versus the natural burial. Someone asked about cost. We had a UMass student do a little work for us last year, and she researched a conventional burial these days is anywhere from $10,000 to $30,000, and that would include some funeral home work. And a natural burial is $2,000 to $6,500. And many people who are doing a natural burial, often because the family can be more involved, that's one of the reasons why the price tag is lower. But you still can depend on the funeral home to help transport the body, to get the burial paperwork that you need in order to do the burial at the cemetery. And so it's up to you how much work you and your family want to do in preparing the body or not preparing it at all. So in Rockridge, the price for the green burial is $2,000. And for the conventional burial, it's $1,500. And the reason why they have a $500 uptick for the green burial is because they come back and they add soil on top of the grave. And so they're charging for that. There's also a trade-off. You're not buying the extra vault that goes into the ground when you're doing some green burial. So that's a little bit about the price differential. So when I did my initial Google search, I found Moose Hill Cemetery and Drake Cemetery, Tisdale Burial Ground. It sounds like these are all old family burial grounds. It's possible, if any of you are related to these cemeteries, and if there's still space left, you could be buried here too. So that would be a little research to do on your part. I did speak to Bill Trout at Rockridge Cemetery, and he's the one who shared that information with me. And they've been doing green burials at Rockridge for about 4 years. Evidently, the president said, "Hey, can we do this?" And they said, "Yeah, we can be doing that." And so, Sharon, you are way ahead most of other people across the state by allowing this to happen in one of your cemeteries. This is a private nonprofit cemetery. What is different about Sharon, I've discovered, is that you don't have any municipal cemeteries that are often run by the Public Works Department. So you've got something very unique in Sharon. I'm really impressed. And I discovered that also as I was trying to find some bylaws, because usually it's the bylaws of the cemetery that have to be changed in order to allow green burial. Someone's already done that for you at Rockridge. I also know that the Sharon Memorial Park and Knollwood Cemetery, they have no intention of offering green burials. And Sharon Memorial Park is, as you probably know, a Jewish cemetery. And by Jewish law, the body needs to come in contact with the earth. So even though they use those concrete boxes or something like that, part of the bottom is cut out so that the body does in fact come into contact with the earth, with the soil. This is a lovely picture from Google. And as soon as I saw this, I said, this was like 1850 or so, beautiful rural historic cemetery. It's a lovely spot. So the Green Burial Council, I don't know if you've already heard from Gretchen from the Green Burial Council or not. What they have done is prepare, okay, you have not. They've prepared standards for 3 different types of burial grounds. The hybrid burial ground is what you have at Rockridge. They do both conventional, and at the ends of rows, they've created some green grave spaces. Right now, Bill told me they have, I think he said around 20 to 30 spaces that are ready for people who want a green burial. And it's usually on the edge of the road that's also near a wooded section. natural burial grounds and conservation burial grounds. These both look more naturalistic. They typically do not have a lawn that you're used to mowing. And natural burial grounds have a burial density of about 600 burials per acre, whereas conservation burial grounds could be 300 or so. And there's also a land trust who needs to be involved in the conservation burial grounds. So as I mentioned, there are no bylaws that I could find for Rock Ridge or any municipal cemeteries in the Sharon. So you can also have family burial grounds as well as private, religious, and municipal. And those of you who may have several acres of land that is the proper distance from a well and or a septic system, it's possible you could have a burial at home. Your deed would have to change on your for your property. And evidently, when it comes time to sell, some people aren't so happy to find a burial ground on property, but it is also possible to do home burial. If you're going to prepare bylaws for the other type, a private or a religious or a municipal cemetery, you want to be aware of, well, what are we going to put into the ground? What do we allow? How will the grave be dug? By hand or by some large equipment? Will we perform burials in the winter? What happens when there's permafrost? Will the mourners be allowed to fill in or close the grave? At Rock Ridge right now, the mourners are allowed to put in some shovelfuls of earth, but not close the entire grave, so not fill the whole grave up. The cemetery staff finishes that process. And it all comes down to liability related to, what happens if somebody falls in the grave? What happens if the casket breaks while we are trying to close the grave with a shovel full of earth? So there are some things that not all cemeterians would like us regular folks to see. Also, depending on the type of cemetery you have, you may allow 0 plantings, or you could have a native palette that you want, and you might propose meadow grasses or meadow flowers or some shrubs. And monuments and markers. This is also a very big topic in the green burial world. At Rock Ridge, if you buy graves side by side, they allow an upright monument. If you're just buying a single grave, you're only allowed to have a flush marker. In both cases, there's a concrete foundation that goes underneath the marker. So even though you're getting a green grave, you're not putting concrete or vault inside the grave, you're still getting some concrete for the monument or the marker. And one of the reasons for that is many cemeteries are promising to take care of things for a really long time, like in perpetuity. So sometimes it might even say, yeah, we're going to keep your monument upright, or we're going to keep it clean. So these are just other issues to think about when you're looking to change bylaws or looking to create a cemetery. And I want to give you some resources. There's a woman named Lee Webster. She was born and raised in Vermont. She lives in New Hampshire, and she's the Energizer bunny behind all of the documentation that you can find from the Green Burial Council or the New Hampshire Funeral Organization. Just go to nhfuneral.org or greenburialcouncil.org, and you can get lots of information from bylaws to templates to a guide for families. And also, Green Burial Massachusetts has a website. And on our website, we have a crowdsourced database. So you can see on our database, we actually had Sharon, Rock Ridge Cemetery. And this is showing that all the cemeteries that we have so far, some don't allow green burial and some do allow green burial. In 2014, there were just 2 cemeteries across the state that were allowing green burial. Now we have 28 in our list. And what we ask is if people want to look up neighboring cemeteries, please let us know, and we can then update this list also. Also, we'd love to share stories on our website or in our newsletter So we would love to hear from you if you have some Green Burial story to share. And also part of our mission is to open up what's called a conservation burial ground. And we are specifically looking right now in the Connecticut River Valley for land to make that happen. And it's been hard, but we are still trying. And so now I think we have some time for questions. And let me, I guess I have to stop the share so I can see people.
Any questions? That was fascinating. Even if you put your question in the chat, perhaps you could ask it because it's hard to keep track of it. Paul?
Yeah, Cheryl, I sent you an email showing a green burial that I attended on October 7th in Rentham. And I'm wondering, I can't, I'm not a host, so I can't share, but maybe you could just show the picture. The body was in a shroud in a wicker basket that the deceased had bought years earlier from someone who makes them in Central Mass, I think in Montague or somewhere around there. And
Yes, Lauren Frazier.
oh, is that right? And
Yep.
she used that casket at home to store things in while she was alive, and then she buried it in it. And there was no marker, so there's no, wasted concrete or anything like that. Nothing permanent that was gonna last forever. Just put her in the ground. It's a beautiful picture, really. If
Oh,
you
I
want
just found it. Okay.
to share it, yeah.
Let me,
Thank you.
So you said that was in Rentham?
Yes, in Rentham. Her husband is on the Conservation Commission, and he was able to change the bylaws of the cemetery to allow green burial. So that's a new thing in Rentham.
Awesome. Yeah, sometimes these changing bylaws is really difficult because you have to go through a town meeting process.
Yeah.
And that could take a year or two to get approval. Ah, yes. So this is beautiful. Yes. So we're looking at the greens, right? to hide the metal. You're looking at the lowering device with the canvas straps and that beautiful wicker basket. Yeah, that's lovely.
I'm a little confused what the green, is a green removed after it's in?
The green.
What's the
meaning-
purpose of the green underneath of the fake grass?
What's the purpose of the fake grass? Is that your question?
Yes, yes.
The people in the cemetery think it looks better. And
Maybe it
under,
hides the dirt that's just been dug up or something.
no, in fact, what's under the grass will be some, I think they're aluminum planks
Oh.
so that it's easier to walk on. It's not necessary.
And is it
It's really-
removed though, once it's in the ground, or that fake grass always stays in the ground?
Oh, no, the fake grass goes,
Okay.
even, so the fake grass will go, the lowering device will go, the greens will go. After the casket's been lowered, it will just look like a regular grave. And then people can start to put some shovelfuls of dirt into it. So this does look like it was part of a lawn cemetery though. So but it's on the edge near the woods. Is that right?
Yeah, and it's also to the left is a road. So it's
Uh-huh.
sort of, on the edge of the cemetery. But they
Yes, yes.
designated an area along the road, parallel to the road, for a row of green burials.
Great.
Thanks for
Thank you
sharing
for
that,
sharing.
Paul.
Yeah.
Yes.
Shelley.
Yeah, there was a documentary, I don't know if it was on Netflix or HBO, about green burial that was really beautiful, and it showed various ways to do that. And one of the ways was to plant, like put a body into some kind of containment and then have a tree also be with the body, and the body nourishes the tree.
Yes, that was, I forget what they call it, but it was like an egg-shaped thing. Is that what you're remembering? Or,
I can't exactly remember. To me,
okay,
I picture it in my mind as you're buried, in some kind of I don't know, like burlap bag or something. And then the tree is planted pretty much right on top of you.
so that is possible to have put the body in the grave and have a tree planted on top. Some cemeteries don't like to do that because, oh my goodness, what happens if the tree dies and you have to replace it and then you have to dig a little bit. But it still can be done. There's also some other things that are a bit gimmicky. One would be the what's called a mushroom suit. It's basically a shroud that's been infused with mycelium. Mycelium is always in our soil anyway, so it's just it was originally designed as an art project, and then they were thinking, well, maybe it's going to help with the mycelium. It's going to help neutralize the toxins in our body. They weren't able to prove that, but I still know there are a lot of people who like the idea of the mushroom suit. There's also this giant egg-shaped thing that if you can manage to put the body into the egg-shaped thing, and then you have to move the egg-shaped thing to put it into the grave. And that is one of those things that shows a tree growing out of it. And we haven't really discussed cremation. There are all kinds of people talking about taking cremated remains and putting them in the shrubs or planting it with a tree. Cremated remains actually are very salty, and plants actually can't use what's in cremated remains. The chambers of a cremation machine goes up to about 1800 degrees Fahrenheit for about 90 minutes. And so that's a lot of gas that's being pumped in to help cremate the body. And it binds the chemicals of your body together so much so that the plants can't get the nutrients out of what we call ashes. They're not really ashes, they're bone fragments, but it takes several years for those things to eventually neutralize a bit and be somewhat useful to the earth. And I'm also aware that there's some legislation going on, and we are a nonprofit charitable entity, so we're not a lobbying group organization, but to provide more choices for bodily disposition. There's starting in January in the new session in the legislature, they want to also promote and make legal in Massachusetts alkaline hydrolysis, which is also known as water cremation, and what's called natural organic reduction. Natural organic reduction is legal in Oregon right now, and I think they just passed it in California. This is also a case where your body goes into a chamber after they've covered it with alfalfa and straw, and over the course of 30 days, it actually converts your body to compost. And so the trick about that is you end up with about a small truckload full of compost. You have become compost, but your hair, your teeth, your bones, everything disappears through this process. But you have to be willing to take it, or we have to find someplace else to take it. So I know that it's been through the legislature once, and now this bill is going into the legislature for a second time. And there's some complications in the processing of things, of who's going to be doing what before it can be become legal in Massachusetts. But that is on the horizon. So there are other methods on the horizon. And in some way, I know I haven't answered the how are we going to run out of land? Oh yes, Eva, what do you want to say?
Well, somebody asked about, said something about running out of land. And this last thing that you told us about takes care of that issue, right? It doesn't take any land. And presumably you would use the compost in existing gardens or farms.
Yes, somebody needs to be willing to take the compost. I believe in Oregon, they have relationships with botanic gardens who are willing to take it. It was written into the law that they can't use it for vegetable gardens. I think there's just an ick factor. I don't think it's bad for the vegetable gardens, but I don't know that for certain. So yeah, it's possible that this compost that gets created could help restore brownfields or gravel pits, or it could be used in some other way. And I also want to mention, as we continue to bury here in Massachusetts, we tell people that they have their grave forever. They don't do that in Europe, right? We have rent a grave in Europe. You get your burial spot for 25, 30 years. I don't know that it's going to come to that here in Massachusetts. However, your descendants potentially can be buried in your grave, but it may take a while before they can be buried in your grave. But in Massachusetts, that's not quite legal to have a non-relative being buried in your grave. So we could run out of space. So we do have to do something about this idea of burial forever. And I know when I visited a natural burial ground in upstate New York, Green Springs, I said, I had a lovely tour, and I said, what are you going to do when you run out of space? And the woman giving me the tour said, well, we'll just buy more land. I thought, oh, that'd be great if you can. So we'll have to do something about that. And, I have a cemetery background, so my tendency is to want to put burials close together. However, I'm working with the land trust, and we're trying to create this conservation burial ground where the burial density is only 300, 400 burials per acre. And that's because conservationists really don't like this idea of digging a bunch of holes and putting bodies in. So it's thinking that the nutrient load of our bodies also is, we can't put, the soils can't handle 1,000 bodies. Maybe the soils can handle this 300 to 400 number of bodies. But there's also, it's very difficult to find land for a cemetery right now, particularly in rural areas, because there are setbacks to wells and even septic systems. So it's an interesting topic, cemetery stuff.
Laura has a question, and then Paul.
Great.
Yeah,
Yes.
one other thing I just wanted to mention about cremation, it's good in terms of it not taking up land, but I've learned that the crematoria are exempt from strict pollution controls. And one thing that people should be aware of, if you have old-fashioned dental amalgam fillings that are 50% mercury, it goes whooshing up the smokestack. And so one might not want to have mercury fillings still if you plan on cremation. I actually tried to get my mom's removed unsuccessfully post-mortem. So at the time, I wasn't aware of other green burial options, but cremation seemed like the absolute best solution, but there are some issues when you actually look into the details.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you for that. And what I've also learned through Mount Auburn Cemetery is people go in wanting to have a cremation burial, but as soon as they hear that Mount Auburn's offering green burial, they're like, oh, well, that's really what I want. So there's a change up happening, even though the vast majority of the United States now is going for cremation. And they are loosely regulated by the State Department of Environmental Protection. Crematories do have to keep track of what's going out the smokestack, and they have to adjust their the heat or the flame or something so that they don't pollute so much. But you're right, it's a tough thing to regulate.
Paul.
Yeah, you were talking about embalming fluid. The Quabbin Reservoir was built in central Massachusetts in the 1930s, and they displaced 4 towns and to make way for this huge reservoir to supply Boston with water. And what they did was they couldn't leave the bodies in the cemetery. They had to dig up the cemeteries and move them to high ground because they didn't want to get the embalming fluid into the drinking water.
Wow, I had not heard that.
Yep.
So cemeteries from 4 towns, perhaps?
Yes, Enfield, Dana, Prescott, and Greenwich were the 4 towns. They had to, move all the people out, and the towns were submerged by 100 feet of water.
Wow.
In the 1930s. Yeah. The Quabbin
1930s.
Reservoir. It's quite a resource for Boston, but it
Yes,
came at a
yes.
price,
Yeah, so it probably had arsenic and formaldehyde in those cemeteries. Yeah.
Yeah, they had to
Wow.
move the bodies out. Yep.
Thank you. Let's see, it's 8:20.
Yeah, I think we could probably wrap this up. I really appreciate, we all appreciate that you being here. So let's give a Zoom round of applause for Candace and Eva.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you so much for being here. And Dave, thank you for arranging this. We really appreciate it. Any last questions before Candace and Eva? You're welcome to stay until the end of our meeting. We're going to be ending soon, but
Oh, is there a Simone? Or- oh, no, she's
Simone,
just clapping.
Simone is just saying yay, I think. I think that's a yay hand. Right, Simone?
I just want to say something. This is such
Hi.
a sensitive topic. Sorry, was Simone saying something? Yeah, no, I don't want to cut anyone, but I just want to say it's a very, very different way to look at how we grieve. And I can see some of the cultural challenges that come in this process. But it is an extremely important conversation because I'm originally from India, and cremation is a big part of the Hindu culture. And we're seeing the carbon footprint that comes out of a lot of this process. And I think it's been very difficult for the government to even approach it, even at little local level. So I appreciate the movement that's coming from all of you. And it was very nice listening to you.
Thank you, Gordon.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right,
well,
well,
you
thanks
guys-
again. We were very enlightened.
Yes, and you have a treasure there in Sharon, so good on you.
Excellent. That's good to know. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Take good care.
All right, take care. So to wrap up, we only have just the announcements of future meetings. So does anybody have anything to share in terms of any last minute information about your group, Paul?
Yeah, I just want to report that some of us are getting started with an energy makeover at the Sharon Historical Society. So I'll report on that as events unfold.
Thank you.
We do heat pumps and solar panels and things like that, hopefully.
Oh, that's great. What is that again?
The Sharon Historical Society, we're going to do an energy makeover to try to reduce the carbon footprint of the building and save
That's
money.
incredible. That's great.
Mhm.
That's really fantastic. Okay. Oh, I'm still recording. Let me stop recording.